I've been crunching some numbers and stats over the past few weeks, and I have to say, I'm kind of concerned about the comic book collecting hobby. I'll start off by saying it doesn't matter how you collect comic books, whether you collect raw or slabbed, signed or not, as long as you're collecting for the reasons that are best for you. It's important to be honest with yourself. Comic book collecting, in my personal experience, is, well, a personal experience. Every book has a story to share, every cover has a history to it. The comic book medium is a unique piece of entertainment that is not only exciting to engage with, but also rich with history. And comic books have evolved a little bit as of late. While some people have always collected comics to sell their books down the road, I've been finding the comic book slab market has been rather, I'll put it bluntly, ridiculous. And although I can pull from many examples, I'm going to focus mostly on one book here to drive my point home. Not only because it's a book I want to own one day, but because I'm Uncanny Derek, and well, it's X-Men related. It's Giant Size X-Men #1. And as you see me talk in previous videos of mine about the comic book slab scandals and the questionable grades of 9.8s, I never really have delved too deep into the pricing of these books. In my most recent essay video, I spoke of a CGC 9.8 of Giant Size X-Men #1 and how the book recently fetched for over $30,000 at auction. And I knew the book peaked during COVID, but I also know that the book at $30,000 is still too high. And I really wanted to know how high it was. What I also knew was happening, as mentioned in my previous videos, is that CGC has been pumping out more 9.8s than ever before. So with more 9.8s flooding the market, surely the price of 9.8s must be dropping, right? It's basic supply and demand after all. It was the cause for the bubble popping with the comic book market in the 90s. For those of you unaware, to try and capitalize on the comic book collector market in the 90s, publishers came out with many gimmicks to try and sell more books, focusing on the idea that comic book buyers were buying more than one book. It was more one to read and one to keep. The speculator market suggested variants of books, gimmicks like foil covers and bagged books would help grow sales and generate excitement about the hobby. I mean, how many people did you know say they had a copy of Death of Superman left in its bag so they could retire later on in life? Yeah, we all know that's not happening. With the ever-popular Wizard magazine suggesting hot books and current trends in the market, buyers were, well, buying. But that was only up until a point. The market became incredibly saturated with books and gimmicks. Golden Age books from the 1940s were genuinely rare due to the poor quality the books were made with. Modern books, however, were made with thicker paper, better cardstock, gloss, higher quality staples, and so on. These books didn't necessarily have the same intrinsic value of the books that came before them, and as such, the comic book market collapsed. And yet, when we look at 9.8 copies of Giant Size X-Men #1, with the influx of more books, the prices must be dropping, right? Right? I jumped down a bit of a rabbit hole, looking at sales from everyone's favorite premier auction house, Heritage Auctions. I looked specifically at every sale of a CGC 9.8 Giant Size X-Men #1 to as early as May of 2015. For full disclosure and for a data point to be set, I started working on this video in the middle of July 2025. I have records of 41 sales from Heritage Auctions starting from 2015, and here are the averages. Now let's address the obvious elephant in the room. COVID was in 2020, and as we all know, the prices for books skyrocketed during that time. That being said, many books have seen corrections, and yet if we look closely at 2024 and 2025, we can see the book starting to grow again in sales. Pre-COVID, from 2015 to the early months of 2020, the book saw modest growth, with the book seeing its first sale above $10,000 in August of 2019 at $11,700. And really, up until COVID, the book was still selling below $15,000. July 2020 saw the first sale of $15,000, with September 13 at $19,200. Then in June 2021, the book jumped and peaked at $72,000, followed by many subsequent sales between $40,000 to $53,000 up until the end of 2022. The prices finally saw below $20,000 again at the end of 2023, with a December 19th sale of $16,800 and a CBCS 9.8 sale in January 2024 for $19,200. But that dip was only for a short time. The book inexplicably spiked again and has been hovering around the $33,000 to $36,000 mark. There was one sale on June 29th, 2025 for $25,200, but that could just be an outlier. There was also a sale of $24,000 on April 7th, 2024. Between these two sales were 4 sales well above $33,000, so I cannot say whether the single June 29th sale is the start of a new trend, but I'm kind of doubtful, especially given how the book inexplicably spiked. Alongside the sales trend, I also hopped over to cgcdata.com to see how many 9/8s were being added to the census, and to be honest, I found the recent numbers somewhat concerning. Going as far back to December 31st, 2018, there were 151 9/8s on the census. If we look at this graph, we can see alongside with the dates from CGC data that there is somewhat normal growth, albeit it's surprising to consider there's that many 9.8 near mint books out there. But look at the current trends. From May 13th to July 1st, we've seen 6 books being added. That's 6 books being added within 49 days. At its current trajectory, with 183 days left in the year, there should be roughly 22 more 9/8s added to the census. That would bring the total to 28 books from May 13th to the end of 2025. If the trend continues, those 28 books would be the most books added in a single year. And if that becomes the case, somehow the books are still fetching incredibly high value despite there being more supply than ever before. So why exactly am I concerned about this hobby? When it comes to graded books, fair market value reigns supreme. Collectors want high grades because high grades not only appear rare, which one could argue is no longer the case with 9/8 giant size X-Men 1s, but higher grade books naturally sell for more. But on the grading side of things, if you look at CGC, the price of grading books is based on the fair market value of said book. From CGC's own website, any book valued over $1,000 falls under the unlimited value tier of pricing, meaning that the cost to grade the book is now 4% of its fair market value. Well, how is that determined? A declared value has to be assigned to a book for submission. As per CGC, the declared value is the submitter's best estimate of the current fair market value of the collectible based on a recent purchase price, a comparable sales result, a price guide, or other reasonable method. It continues. CGC does not assign values to collectibles. If CGC determines that a collectible is undervalued and does not qualify for the tier services selected, it may adjust their tier and charge the appropriate difference in CGC services, grading, and/or services fees based on its determination of the collectible's current fair market value. For the purposes of this policy, the current fair market value is the value of the collectible if it were to be sold, as determined by CGC, in its sole reasonably exercised discretion. CGC will determine the current fair market value of a collectible based upon what CGC believes, in its sole reasonably exercised opinion, to be the reliable current market information. CGC may use actual pricing and sales information available to it, including prices in the actual transaction history of the collectible in question. It goes on to say, CGC reserves the right to use the declared value listed by the submitter on the CGC submission form as the current fair market value, and in no event will CGC's determination of the current fair market value exceed the declared value listed by the submitter on the CGC submission form. That being said, if you submit a 9.8 worthy giant size X-Men #1 to CGC and try to declare its worth at $500, they're either going to bump it up to the unlimited tier or just reject your book to be graded. But what does all this jargon mean to giant size X-Men #1 and the comic book collecting hobby? Well, if you have what you think is a 9.4 copy of giant size X-Men #1, the cost of submission will be 4% of its fair market value. Looking at Heritage Auction's last sale of a 9.4 from July 1st, the book sold for $5,760. So congratulations, it costs you $230 to have your book graded to a 9.4. But if you think you have a 9.8, as per the recent sale of $25,200 from June 29th, congratulations, you now have paid over $1,000 to have your book graded. And here's where the cycle begins. When books are worth more, submitters are somewhat incentivized to submit their books for grading. If your book can sell for higher value, why not try to get it graded to a 9.8? And if you're CGC, you want 9.8s to be submitted because, as per my previous example, the difference of cost between a 9.4 and a 9.8 is nearly $800. All that goes directly into CGC's pocket. Despite there being more 9.8s on the market than ever before, and with 2025 on its way to setting a new record for 9.8s, I must ask you, what do you think a 9.8 giant size X-Men is really worth? Or maybe I can ask this another way. When do you think this bubble is going to pop? Do you think my concerns are warranted, or do you think this is really no big deal? Either way, let me know in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.